Buddy JayC here, and welcome to another Thursday night live stream. I hope all is going well for everyone out there in YouTube land. Hopefully, you have had some successful toy hunts or maybe found some discounted deals at the local Ollie's or Ross stores or wherever you do your toy hunting at these days. Um, I've Things been going pretty good here for me, I would say. Yeah. I do have my in-laws coming and visiting me for 3 weeks starting tomorrow, so hopefully that'll go good. But otherwise, everything's been pretty good. I see people popping in. We got Mr. Allmine. What's up? Silver Surfer 76. What's up, my friend? How are you doing? So I thought for today, kind of talk about what we might expect for this hobby next year. We're getting pretty close to the end of the year, um, and I don't mean like I don't have a list of all the Marvel Legends that are going to be released in 2024, that type of thing. But I just mean as in the how the hobby itself is going to kind of look like. So, as I was talking about, a lot of discounts you're going to be seeing this holiday season. Already, if you have a local Ollie's, you've been seeing a lot of Hasbro product on discount. Ross stores, Big Bad Toy Store just had a big sale on Super 7 stuff this week. Amazon has started to run sales on products. You could get that deluxe Ironheart figure, Marvel Legend Ironheart figure for under $10 earlier this week. And I expect you're going to see more of that kind of thing, as we finish out this year. But what I will tell you is enjoy the discounts while you can, and enjoy finding the figures easily while you can, because next year, I don't have any intel saying like prices are going to go up again next year, but what I will tell you is likely what you're going to see next year is companies are going to be cutting back on the volume of product that they produce. And what I mean by volume, I don't mean like there's going to be less pre-orders per se. I mean like less number of figures that they release. So like for instance, instead of, and this is just a random number I'm pulling out of my hat, instead of producing 500 G.I. Joe classified uh, bazooka figures, they're only going to produce 200 bazooka figures, that type of thing. So what that translates to is stores, retailers won't be getting as much stock in of these things, and therefore that some of this stuff is probably going to get harder to actually find next year, which will then alleviate what you're seeing now with all these retailers clearancing out all of this unsold stock from the past year or so, because companies had gotten kind of spoiled on the online shopping habits of people during the COVID pandemic when everyone was trapped at home, and wasn't going, instead of spending money on like going on vacation or something, they were spending money on physical products and stuff, including action figures and stuff. So companies, to try and meet that demand, started ramping up their production rates of stuff, which is why things here recently have not been nearly as hard to find in general. And I'm not even, I know some people say, well, my Target and Walmart still don't have anything, and that's distribution in general, but there isn't anything here recently in the past year or so that, if you're willing to pre-order or buy online or what have you, was really that difficult to find. So, but that's likely going to change next year. So, if you kind of moved away from pre-orders and stuff, you might want to start thinking about going back to doing pre-orders if it's something you really want, because it might not last as long. And I mean, this isn't this is a cycle that we've seen in this hobby many times before, so it's not really anything new. Um, so, I'm not saying it won't hurt some companies and retailers and stuff, but it's not like I saw a video pop up on my feed the other day. I don't even remember who put the video out, but the crux of it was because Big Bad Toy Store was running a clearance sale on Super 7 products. Super 7 was in major trouble. Like they were going to be going out of business. And I'm sorry, but that's just not how it works. And no, Super 7's not going out of business. In fact, I would say Super 7 is actually doing pretty good. I've seen reports recently that some of their Ultimate figures have started to show up at Walmart stores. So it sounds like they're getting more of their product at places like Walmart, Amazon. Amazon's been carrying their stuff. So, I don't think Super 7 is hurting that much. That's not to say that companies aren't, companies are going to, as people buy less for whatever reason, there's a variety of reasons. Definitely companies will cut back and things like that. But no, I don't think, because Big Bad Toy Store had a clearance sale. And I even reached out to Big Bad Toy Store and I was like, are you guys phasing out carrying Super 7 products? And they're like, no, we're just clearancing out old inventory and, to get it out of here. And, they're basically like, we think Super 7's a great company with a long future. So I don't think Big Bad Toy Store is going to discontinue carrying a Super 7 product anytime soon. So that's basically where I see things going next year. I wish I had more of a pleasant report to give you guys. Sorry, my feed, I guess, lagged because there were no comments, and then now there's like in comments here. So sorry. Tiglu says, "Talking toys, some nice deals on Big Bad Toy Store." Yeah, and definitely as we get closer and closer to Christmas, you're gonna see good deals. Whether it's Amazon, I have little doubt Amazon's going to start discounting more and more product. Marvel Legends, McFarland stuff, Big Bad Toy Store, Entertainment Earth, they'll continue to have sales. Target, Walmart will probably have sales. I've seen like the new those new Batman and Robin figures, the movie figures that just went up for pre-order this week, which I will tell you seem to be selling pretty well. Those seem to be pretty popular with folks. But like Target, right off the bat, they had them on discount like as soon as they went up for pre-order. I mean, that's the type of thing we're talking about here, because stores, as we get closer and closer to the holidays, are trying to entice you to buy from them by running these huge deals. And they also want to just clear out a lot of this inventory that kind of had piled up as companies had ramped up their productions. But if you're familiar with manufacturing, during COVID, a lot of people were buying online, but that's slowly been tapering off. And so but companies have been slow to kind of reduce their production of stuff. And so there's kind of this disconnect between, how much companies have been producing and how much people have been buying. And so a lot of unsold merchandise sitting around in warehouses that now retailers, as we get into the holiday season, which of course is the prime shopping season, especially for toys and stuff, you're going to see a lot of deals. But next year, I do expect things are going to get harder to find, and you're not going to, prices are probably going to remain pretty constant from what we've been seeing. I'm not necessarily expecting any kind of price increase next year. I hope not, at least. But as far as like volume of stuff that gets produced, and I don't know if that means even, that might mean we might see a little bit less of pre-order, the amount of stuff that companies put up for pre-order, but I don't really expect that to change too much. I think it's more that they're just going to produce less of the stuff that they're putting out so that it becomes harder to find, essentially. And that will create scarcity marketing. That will build, as sadly, and especially when you're dealing with collectibles, when something is deemed harder to get, That brings out the scalpers, that brings out, people who will, buy up stuff in hopes that they can resell it. So that will drive up sales. So all of that will come into play as these companies start to cut back on things, is my feeling for next year. Mr. Allman, all retailers are going to cut back big time probably next year. Yep. So definitely, retailers are going to order less, which means the companies are going to produce less. But I mean, the companies already know this, so like the companies are already preparing for this as they're, starting to cut back what they're producing and stuff. So, but yes. Curtis says, I keep getting hiss notices. It will probably ship next. Yeah, I same thing. I expect it to ship out within I mean, people overseas are already getting the damn thing, so I'm expecting it to ship out. Same thing with the NECA turtle van. I keep getting shipping updates. In fact, I got a update just the other day saying it's like I've been getting once a week the shipping update saying we're getting ready, prepared to ship these out, and then like nothing, and then nothing. But this week I got, okay, we're really getting prepared to ship yours out. Expect a FedEx tracking number in the next few days, which I've not yet gotten the FedEx tracking number, but I am expecting the NECA turtle van to ship out here very soon. I don't know. Yeah, I'm kind of wondering which is going to get here first, the NECA turtle van or the Cobra Hiss tank. They're probably going to show up right at the same time, and I really haven't found a place for either item yet. So, I'm going to be, having these two huge items show up at the same time, but that's how it goes, I guess. MK says Walmart and Target are terrible. You have to walk the way to the store. Yeah, I mean, but again, that a lot depends on where you live in the country as far as how well your Target and Walmart are stocked. I mean, that's another problem why some of this inventory is stacked up so badly. Is distribution. Companies really need to try and fix their distribution better. And I know COVID and the shipping and all that screwed things up pretty badly. And so I think that's has some of it to play. But let's be honest, it's never been great when it comes to distribution of products. It's always, the Targets and Walmarts that are near the shipping ports and such always end up getting most of the inventory, and then those of us like in the middle of the country and such, we're lucky if we see one figure on the peg, let alone a lot. So that definitely is something I think toy companies need to try and continue to work on. But I mean, that's an age-old problem. So honestly, at this stage, if they haven't gotten it fixed, I'm not sure they ever will. But yeah, I mean, like I say, if you go to a Target or Walmart, if you're somebody who live in like California and you go to a Target and Walmart, like, those guys are always finding stuff. But, like me here in Maryland, I go to my Target and Walmart and 9 times out of 10, the shelves are empty. So, and when they do get something in, it's in a very small number. So of course it sells out very quickly. Quinn, do I think, hold on, I gotta make an adjustment. Do you think since toy companies will make less, that will increase prices again and not lose their profit? Oh, again, I've not heard anything about prices going up at this time. Prices to me are always going to go up. They're not going to go down. So it is inevitable that eventually there will be another price increase. Hopefully it won't be this year. But yes, and it's kind of a chicken and the egg scenario here, because as prices go up, people end up buying less, right? Either they just leave the hobby altogether, they've been priced out of the hobby, so they've moved on to something else, or they're just simply cutting back on how much product that they're buying. So as the prices go up, that shrinks your consumer demographic, which then means as companies start producing smaller numbers of product, the prices go up, because with manufacturing, when you have an order, if you're only producing 1,000 action figures, that's going to cost a lot more than if you were producing 10 or 20,000 action figures. So again, that just makes the prices go up even more. I hear people, I continue to hear people that insist Hasbro's ripping us off. Like, they're just like price gouging the shit out of us, and they don't need to have, inflation's not real, blah, blah, blah. And I mean, I don't believe that for 1 second, but it is more than just general inflation. It is more than just that the prices at the factories went up, which they did. Shipping costs went up. All of that did go up. So that affected it. But the other thing that you're seeing is as less and less kids are buying toys, as some adult collectors are either aging out. That's another problem that we don't really talk about here. As people like myself get older, or and this kind of hit home to, I was watching this YouTube channel called Toy Federation, which I don't know if any of you have ever checked it out. But basically it's a channel that's run by a vintage toy store. And like, they do these videos where like they fit, and I don't know how much of this is staged or what have you, but like, they'll have a customer come in and they'll film like them negotiating. Like, somebody comes in with a box of toys to sell, and the videos about them kind of negotiating the price and stuff. But this guy had brought in this box of older 12-inch G.I. Joe stuff from the 60s, the original G.I. Joe figures. And the guy was like, these used to go for a lot of money, but they don't really, the prices have been going down because the people that really collected that stuff, who grew up in were kids in the 60s, they're getting to an age where, frankly, they're starting to die out. I mean, or they're getting so old that, they really can't, they're not buying collectible action figures anymore. So that demographic for the original G.I. Joe figures is slowly kind of just, withering away. And that's going to happen. I saw somebody make a comment on a Facebook page for G.I. Joe Classified saying, like, this might be the last great, G.I. Joe Classified might be the last great action figure line for, essentially G.I. Joe Real American Hero, the stuff from the 80s, which is what I grew up on. And, maybe there's a little more time for 1 or 2 additional action figure lines before, people like me get so old that, we croak or whatever. But yeah, it's got a legitimate point that as the adult collector, which is mostly people my age or a little bit younger who, grew up on these things and collect for nostalgia, are getting older and kind of aging out. It's definitely going to shrink the market for adult collectors a bit. But as to your original question, Quinn, do I think prices are going to go up significantly this year? Again, I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't predict the future, but I have not seen any indication of that. And my hope is, at least for this next year, prices will remain fairly stable. That's not to say that there isn't going to be an expensive HasLab or an expensive store exclusive or something like that. But in general, I think, like, the going price for a 6 to 7 inch scale figure is going to stay around that $25 mark, and so on and so forth. Retro Collector. Hi Jay, Hasbro Pulse has a new clearance section. Mattel Creations and Super 7 are offering discount sales well, they're in the same boat. And in fact, one thing I was going to point this out, so kind of a good segue here. So one thing I've been noticing is all those McFarland Store exclusives from the McFarland Store are now popping up on Amazon. So all these guys, these manufacturers that have been trying to sell directly to the consumer, they're in the same boat. They've got all this unsold merchandise that now they're trying to find. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if some of that stuff that you're seeing at Ollie's came directly from places like Hasbro Pulse and stuff, because Hasbro Pulse, I know there are people that will sit there and say, oh, I buy only from Hasbro Pulse, but I'm willing to bet you that still far more people buy outside of Hasbro Pulse at either Target, Walmart, Amazon, Big Bad Toy Store, Entertainment Earth. I mean, the manufacturers trying to sell directly definitely takes little bites, especially out of the smaller toy retailer, but not so much so that people are only buying from Hasbro Pulse and stuff. So my guess is Hasbro Pulse is got a lot of unsold merchandise that they've been sitting on, and now they're going to have to try and clearance it out. And either they're going to try and clearance it out on their own website, or they're going to send them off to other retailers and try and get them discounted or what have you. But yeah, they're basically acting as a retailer, so they're in the same boat as all the other retailers, basically. What's up, Blake? Late but here. Hiya, JayC, and all you awesome folks in the chat. Finally got a Nightfall Batman from Best Buy. I've noticed, well, and I think this is because we're getting closer to the holidays, but I've noticed Best Buy has been ramping up their action figures a bit, which again, I'm guessing is because they're trying to entice people for the holidays, to buy toys and stuff. So you got to remember that even in today's day and age of adult collectors, Christmas time is the number one selling period for toy manufacturers. This is like, companies are made and break on how they do with holiday sales. So, that's their biggest sales period of the year. So, news, like as far as new reveals and stuff, tend to be light in these final months of the year, but companies really do ramp up, their sales and trying to get the product, that's been sitting out there all year. They're trying to get it clearanced out so that there's room on the shelves for new product next year. Yep, the McFarland Store shipping costs are brutal. I agree with you 100%. I buy very little from the McFarland Store. Okay, so first of all, and I've been pretty, upfront about this, I do not support any of these toy manufacturers selling directly to the consumer. I think it's kind of bullshit that they are essentially trying to undercut their customers, the retailers, and primarily the small retailers. Walmart and Target aren't going to be affected that much, but a Big Bad Toy Store, an Entertainment Earth, a Nerdzoic, those guys definitely are probably going to, they take hits when you're buying directly from the toy manufacturer instead of going through them. So I 100%, unless it's a store exclusive, unless it's like a Pulse exclusive or a McFarland Store exclusive, I do not encourage any of you to buy directly from the manufacturer, because I think if that trend continues, the small toy retailers will end up being put out of business eventually, and I think the hobby will get a lot more worse if that happens. But I also realize that I can say that until I'm blue in the face, which I have, and people will go where they want to go. They'll go where they think they can get the product the fastest or the cheapest or what have you. But I often see people say like, well, Hasbro Pulse should, if I buy from Hasbro Pulse, they should be the ones to send it out first. And I suppose they could, but then that makes it even worse, because if they're sending the product out that you bought directly from Hasbro, the manufacturer, before they send the product out to their actual customers, which are the retailers, well, then the retailers are not going to be too happy about that. So, they're not happy about things like Hasbro Pulse in general, but they're going to be even more unhappy if the toy manufacturer starts to try and undercut them by offering the stuff at, like, say, a lower price or faster shipping or anything like that. It creates an unfair business practice. You're kind of monopolizing, the market which a company like Hasbro that has so many IPs that are related to adult collectibles, that becomes a real thing. If you're some smaller company that only has one or two things, it's not nearly as big a deal. But, again, a Hasbro where they have so many of the IPs that relate to the adult collectibles, it definitely has a major effect. Quinn's Comics says, a lot of my customers support local, especially when it comes to comic shop, and greatly appreciate. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people will go out of their way to support a small business. But there are plenty of people who are just going to go where they think they can get it cheapest, where they think they can get it faster. And, I don't necessarily blame the general consumer to really, the general consumer should really be thinking about this because, you don't until you, actually, unless you start your own business, it's probably not something you really think about. It's usually the people who complain the most about these are the people that have like the small businesses and stuff. And that's because they're the ones that are being affected by it. But the general consumer, I don't think generally thinks about it. But it's the same concept that's behind, Toys R Us went out of business, yes, because of some bad business decisions, but also because of convenience. People started going to Walmart and Target and Amazon because it was just more convenient to go do your everyday shopping and be able to find your action figures and not have to go someplace separate like a toy store. So that was in large part one of the major factors that ended up putting Toys R Us out of business. We all now sit around going, oh, I really miss Toys R Us. I really miss Toys R Us. But we didn't really think about when we were buying stuff from Walmart and Target and Amazon, we didn't really think about the long-term effect of how that would end up putting Toys R Us out of business. And I think just, people don't really think about that kind of thing. Mr. Allmight, I agree, JC. I try to buy local small stores from Big Bad EE as much as I can. And I mean, it doesn't just, you're going to always hear me promote Big Bad Toy Store and Entertainment Earth because they are paying sponsors. Big Bad Toy Store is, you generally don't hear me personally vouch for any toy retailer because you never know what could happen. Like take Megalopolis Toys, and if you're not familiar with them, don't worry about it. But those of you who are familiar with them, I don't think those guys started out with the idea that they were going to rip people off. And in fact, for a while there, they seemed like a pretty solid business. But then when the pandemic hit and things started to turn a bit sour, they obviously didn't have a strong enough infrastructure in place to handle, the setbacks. And so things started to go badly and they went badly quick. And, it's amazing, if you have a business that starts to struggle, how quickly things can go downhill. And I think they just got in over their heads and people ended up losing money, unfortunately. But I don't think those guys set out to rip people off. It's just that it kind of, it just went badly. And again, I'm not saying they don't have blame in that because I'm sure part of it was bad business decisions that they made. But my point is they didn't it wasn't like they were con artists that set out to try and rip people off. And so you generally won't hear me personally vouch, I personally vouch for such and such because unless I have direct control over something, I'm not going to personally vouch for anybody. But Big Bad Toy Store is probably the closest you'll ever hear me get to a personal vouch. And that's just because, A, they've been a sponsor of mine for over 20 years. They understand the value of advertising and always have. They have always been, I think, a very good toy e-tailer. So, nothing is 100%. I'm not going to sit here and say that one day Big Bad Toy Store couldn't go out of business. But I think they're probably as close as far as a small toy e-tailer. Them and EE's kind of the same. I mean, they're Entertainment Earth is a distributor as much as a toy retailer. I don't know if a lot of people realize that, but Entertainment Earth actually acts as an actual distributor. So they actually send products to other toy retailers and comic shops and stuff. Now again, I have often wondered how there isn't a conflict of interest of being a distributor and a retailer at the same time. But there you go. But Entertainment Earth is definitely, they've been around probably even longer than Big Bad Toy Store. Again, over 20 years. So, they're not the size of a major corporation like a Toys R Us or Walmart or Target, but they're probably about as solid as you're going to get in this day and age for toy retailers. So, and honestly, I kind of lost my track of where I was going with this, but yeah, supporting your small business, I think is great. There is a little more risks the smaller the business, especially when you're talking about online orders and stuff and pre-orders and stuff. The smaller the business, the little more of a risk there is. But I definitely think it's a good thing to try and support your small businesses. And that goes for comic book shops and stuff. I mean, comic book shops are a dying breed, in my opinion. Unfortunately, the comic book market is not a thriving one these days from everything I've read. And I'm not an expert on this subject because I don't collect comics anymore. I haven't for years, mainly because the market priced me out. I wasn't willing to pay $5 for, a comic book, which in my opinion, the art has deteriorated in most titles and the stories have not been great either. So, but, mostly it's just the price, used to be $1, well, when I first started collecting comics, it was 50 cents, then 75 cents. Then they went up to $1, then $1.25, $1.50. But, when they started getting over $3, I was basically done with comics. And I certainly miss reading comics because they were a major part of my life for a very long, for most of my, teenage years and even into early adulthood. But I just $5 an issue, to me is just too much for a comic. So I don't really buy comics anymore. I don't follow the comic book trade that closely anymore, but all indications are that the comic book industry is struggling. So of course comic book shops are going to be struggling too, and they're having to diversify into things like toys and even Funko Pops and all that kind of stuff. So I definitely advocate, if you can, support those guys. But generally, if you go into a comic book store to buy an action figure, they're usually a couple of dollars more than they would be at a Target or Walmart. So especially as prices in general have gone up on these things, it definitely gets harder and harder to ask somebody to pay even more when the prices are already so high. There's legitimate reasons why the prices are a little bit higher at those small businesses, but regardless, when it's hitting your wallet, it can definitely be a hard ask to say, hey, support the small business, even though it means you might have to take longer to get it, or you might have to pay a little bit more. And sadly, the toy industry in general has never really been a strong supporter of small businesses because they're always much more interested in catering into the large toy retailers. I mean, as much as people love Toys R Us, I don't know how many of you are as old as I am, but there used to be a time before Toys R Us and some of those large toy stores came along where most toy stores were individually owned mom and pop shops. And those all got put out of business by the Toys R Us stores and such. But, it's kind of like, it's kind of like, small fish, you're the small fish and then a bigger fish comes along and eats you. And then eventually a bigger fish comes along and eats you, and so on and so forth. But I don't know where this came from, but Coco says, Miles Morales will never be Spider-Man. See, when I hear people say that, my response is, he will never be Peter Parker Spider-Man. But he's already a Spider-Man. One of what seems to be like mini Spider-Man that are out there today. He's not the Spider-Man I think of, because the Spider-Man I think of is Peter Parker, because that's who I grew up reading and stuff. But anybody who likes Miles Morales for whatever reason, I hold no ill will towards them for liking Miles Morales. And if that's their go-to Spider-Man, then I say more power to them. Again, it'll never be my go-to Spider-Man because it's not the Spider-Man I grew up reading. But he is definitely a Spider-Man. Now you might argue that it's ridiculous that we have like 20 different Spider-Man out there and such, but that again has just kind of been the way the comic book world is. MK, Medieval Spawn, I assume you mean the Kickstarter. I don't know. It's hard to really read Todd McFarlane's mind and where he does what he wants to do. I don't know. I could understand why he decided not to do the Kickstarter, but like I was really surprised when he came out this past summer at San Diego and started promoting that Kickstarter again, which it had been like 2 years before, I think, when he initially announced it. And now he's just gone completely silent on it. So, I don't know. Obviously, that's not a well-oiled machine. There's obviously not a set plan. I don't know if it's like they're looking at all the negative feedback that companies like Hasbro get whenever they do a HasLab, or in particular like a Marvel Legend HasLab. So I don't know if like that's scaring them off from doing a Kickstarter. I don't know if they really weren't happy with their first Kickstarter. But then again, why come out and tease it 2 years later and then again go silent on it? But I really have no idea what's going to go on with that. I think probably that figure will eventually get released. And if Todd ever gets his damn movie out, that might be when they do it. But, whether that movie ever actually gets made or not, to me is a big question mark as well. So I guess we'll just have to see. Jen says, do people debate who is Green Lantern between how, I can't say that I personally have seen people argue, but I'm willing to bet that somewhere on the internet there have been arguments over who is the true Green Lantern. So I would say probably your answer is yes, because that's just the nature of the internet. I guess if you want to get technical on that, instead of saying Miles Morales isn't Spider-Man, the better way to phrase it is Miles Morales isn't my favorite Spider-Man, because he, like I said, he's 100% Spider-Man. I mean, somebody who has control of that character said, yes, he is Spider-Man. So it's not a question of whether he's Spider-Man or not. He may not be your favorite Spider-Man, but he's definitely Spider-Man. So, and we all have our favorites. I mean, to me, Steve Rogers will always be the go-to Captain America. I have no problem with Sam Wilson or John Walker or Bucky Barnes, donning the suit from time to time. But Steve Rogers will always be my go-to Captain America. No matter what Marvel does with that character, he will always be my go-to, Captain America. So, same thing with Thor. It doesn't bother me when, they do a Lady Thor, because the original Thor is still my go-to Thor. If there's somebody out there that likes, Jane Foster's Thor, I say more power. I mean, I love John Walker. I think he's a great character, and I love the story arc when he took over as Captain America. He still wasn't my, go-to Captain America, but I love that character. And when he became U.S. Agent, I thought it was great. So, you can definitely get good stories out of these guys, even if you don't really think they're the true original version of the character. But, and every one of these characters has had multiple versions. I mean, a lot of people consider Hal Jordan, the original Green Lantern, but he's not really the original Green Lantern. But he's definitely, a pretty go-to Green Lantern when most people think of the character. John Stewart is just because he appeared in the Justice League cartoon, and that was a lot of people, a lot of people were introduced to Green Lantern from the Justice League cartoon. So John Stewart is a lot of people's go-to Green Lantern because that's how they were introduced to the character. They had never even heard of Hal Jordan, if when they were back watching the Justice League cartoon. So it really depends on when you entered reading comics, or how you were introduced to these characters. I think plays a large role in it. The Wolfpack Toys comics always circle back. People lose their mind. Yeah, people don't like change. I don't like change. I mean, I'll be the first to admit that I'm often not a fan of change, but and I think as you get older, that's definitely also something. As you get older, I think it's harder to accept change. I don't know exactly why that is, but that's been my experience as I've gotten older. Like I definitely was much more open-minded when I was younger, whereas now I find myself being kind of the old, God damn them changing that, or whatever. So some of that's just age as well. Yeah, there's like a million different Flashes. I mean, there's been multiple Batman, there's been multiple Superman, there's been I mean, like I said, every major comic character I think has ended up. I mean, because that became a thing. And some of that, let's be honest, some of that was done for PR purposes. You know, killing off characters often was done for PR purposes. Anything that could get these comic companies and their titles in the mainstream media, they were gimmicks. Comic industry is in large part been built on gimmicks. So whether it's multiple covers, whether it's variant covers, whether it's killing off a character, whether it's making a character a black person or a female or what have you, a lot of that is done for gimmick purposes to increase their sales, and oftentimes it works. I think I have no problem when a character gets changed. I just I always hope that the story is good. Like I said, going back to John Walker, that's one of my favorite Captain America stories, when Steve Rogers had to step down as Captain America, mainly because the Red Skull, who was impersonating a senator, was screwing him over, and had the government basically take the name and everything back, and they gave it to John Walker. That was a fantastic story. But I could see if that story ran today with in the internet age, people would have had a cow, that John Walker had become Captain America. And, and it didn't last. I mean, he didn't stay Captain America, but it was a great story. There are other stories that I didn't like as much, like the death of Superman. I mean, Doomsday, the fight between Doomsday was great, but that whole story arc afterwards, and the death and return of Superman, I mean, I like some of the characters that came out of it, but like I love that's my favorite version of Superboy and stuff, but the overall story at the time was not a favorite of mine. Even like Batman getting his back broken, while I love the Nightfall Batman armor, I was never a huge fan of Azrael as Batman. Um, so, some of those stories work, some of them don't. Some of those characters become classics. I've never really read the Miles Morales stories, so I'm not. I've read some, like a few comics with him in it, but I'm not that familiar with Miles Morales, to be absolutely honest. So again, I don't have a strong negative preference for him, but again, he's not my go-to Spider-Man, because I always think of Peter Parker as Spider-Man. Not Peter B. Parker, but Peter Parker. And like I say, all these different, multiverse, variant, versions, it's now getting to the point where it's like there's so many different versions of these characters, it gets hard to keep track. Coco says Doom always ends up killing Kang in the comics, so that would be appropriate. I guess you're talking about the MCU now. I always thought Doom, like, Krang was a I always thought Kang was a future version of Doom. I don't know if that was something they established and then changed in the comics, but I always, for some reason, remember that Kang was supposed to be like a future version of Doctor Doom or something. Ning says, I think I can see myself getting out of toy collecting mostly reluctantly because it's increasingly becoming an insular market that depends on the smaller and smaller customers. Yeah, well, I mean, it's always been a somewhat smaller, as far as adult collectors, it's always been fairly small. But as you see less and less kids buying toys and companies having to focus more and more on the adult collector, you're right, it is definitely becoming insular. And it's becoming less fun, not just because of the price increases, but just the bitterness that you see pop up online from so many people. And some of it's understandable, nobody likes to pay more and stuff, but some people really just seem to take joy. Like when I talked about, like, here's an example. When I talked about the HasLab Giant Man, there was never once where I sat there and said, "Oh man, I hope this thing fails. I think it's, it deserves to fail." I said, based on the numbers that we were seeing at the time that the campaign was live, it was not looking great for the campaign. I also said there was always a possibility you could see this huge influx of numbers at the very end, which is what happened. But there was never once where I had any malice intent towards the Giant Man. And I'm very happy for those who wanted that, who truly wanted that figure, that they were able to get it and will be able to add it to their collection. I think that's great. And I have no problem, does Hasbro have to do it as a crowdsourcing campaign? No, they don't. But it doesn't really anger me that they do either. I definitely know that Hasbro could never get something like that out at mass retail. Those of you who sit there and insist the Giant Man could be sold at Target and Walmart are full of shit. They have no idea how the industry works, how retail works, or any of it. So they're just speaking out their ass. So I realize that this is one of, this type of thing, a direct-to-consumer type thing, is really the only way that they can get stuff like that out to market. And I think $200 is in today's market prices is a pretty fair price. I don't think that's price gouging, especially when you realize that they're making it in such small numbers that increases the cost of the item. It would be great if they could get it out at Walmart and Target and it could be a general release, because that would reduce the cost of it. But Walmart and Target don't want to touch that thing with a 10-foot pole. Regardless that it backed, that was not a strong campaign because it took to the very last minute and likely was just the international numbers that were added to the counter at the very end that put that over the top. But that campaign struggled throughout the period that it was live. And so retailers, I'm sure, looked at that and, so in the future, they're going to look at something like that and say, yeah, I mean, they already know that something like that's not going to sell in huge numbers. And if Walmart and Target tried to carry the Giant Man, it would eventually end up on clearance. Every large item that those companies have put out at retail, whether it's the 12-inch Sentinel, I mean, I don't know how many of you remember when the Marvel Universe Sentinel, which was only 12 inches, ended up on clearance at Ross stores. That was another clearance item that ended up on Ross. And the reason is because people did not buy those things in huge numbers. As much as people say they love Sentinel and they love larger figures and they want all this stuff, the numbers just aren't there. The voices are louder than the actual numbers to back it up. And that's what a lot of people that sit online don't seem to realize is this is a very small niche market in general. And it's not that easy to get stuff out there like that at retail. If it's backed by a major motion picture, something like that. So like, for instance, the Batmobile that McFarland put out, that only was able to go out at retail because it was based on the Flash movie, which of course completely bombed at the box office. But everybody had high hopes that that movie was going to be a huge blockbuster, summer blockbuster, and that's why the retailers were willing to carry that Batmobile. However, also based on that same movie, they were not willing to carry the Batwing, which is why that ended up being a McFarland Store exclusive and was much more expensive than the Batmobile. The Batwing was like $300. The Batmobile was like 60, $70. And even backed by a movie, retailers didn't want to carry that larger Batwing, even though they were willing to carry the Batmobile. So that's your difference. Giant Man, which is a fairly obscure character in the Avengers, is not something that's going to be extremely popular with large numbers of people. So it's not something that's going to do well at mass retail. But I totally get, and I've said this many times, that eventually, just like we saw with comic books, the prices will get to a point where most people, it will become a very small niche market, probably mostly direct to consumer, a lot of crowdsourcing. You're going to see more and more crowdsourcing. You're going to see companies like Hasbro license their brands out to smaller toy companies because it's going to be no longer worth it for them to produce it themselves. So they're going to start making their money from the license itself and let other companies, smaller companies, put the stuff out. And that's where this hobby is going. And it means we'll get some pretty cool stuff that we wouldn't have gotten 10, 15, 20 years ago. But it also means it's going to be very expensive. And, you know, I don't see any point in getting mad at that. If you're at a point where, you know, it's just not within your price range, and that's perfectly understandable, you know, don't get mad. Just go find something else to do with your, you know, money or whatever. You know, it's okay. And that is going to happen. You know, I don't think anybody here thinks that as action figures get more and more expensive, that the demographic is actually going to grow. But unfortunately, to make things cheaper, that means something has to be cut. You know, I had this discussion on Facebook today, and we saw the introduction of those 4-inch Epic Hero Star Wars figures that Hasbro's putting out, which are, you know, 4-inch, you know, minimal articulation. I think they have a little more articulation than like the retro collection stuff, but they're still pretty minimal. They're not like Marvel Universe figures or whatever. And of course, they started doing the Epic Heroes with Marvel. You know, that was the first brand that they did these with, and now they're doing Star Wars. And those figures cost about $10, so significantly cheaper than what a Marvel Legend today costs. So a Walmart and a Target are going to be much more willing to carry that product. A parent who wants to get their kid a Spider-Man figure or a Luke Skywalker are going to be much more likely to buy the $10 figure, even though it's made more cheaply, less articulation, less paint apps. You know, as some say, it's a step up from a Happy Meal toy, but it's cheaper. So if your kid wants Spider-Man or Luke Skywalker, the parent who is on probably somewhat of a limited budget, and let's be honest, the kid's probably only going to play with the figure for like 2 minutes, and then they're going to move on to something else like the iPhone or iPad. So the parent's going to buy the $10 figure. And that's what, you know, Hasbro's still trying to desperately tap into, whether they succeed or not, because I don't think it's the quality of the figure. I think it's kids today just, you know, you're not going to get kids really into action figures anymore because there's too many things like, again, your iPhone or iPad and the games that are on those devices that are going to take, you know, the kids' attention away. But that's why you see things like those Epic Heroes. So as far as getting cheaper action figures, that's the result. So you can complain until you're blue in the face about prices, but that $25 Marvel Legend is never going to go back down to $12, you know, $15, $20. It's going to stay at $25, and eventually it will probably go up to $28 and then $30 and then so on and so forth. And of course, you know, some of the deluxe stuff or some of the store exclusives, they already cost that much. And then you get to the smaller companies doing the smaller production runs, Super 7 and stuff, and then you start talking about $50, $60 action figures. So that is, unfortunately, the future of this hobby. So if that's puts it the stuff out of your price range, quit torturing yourself and just go find something else, because again, that's not going to change. You can get mad on the internet, you can start cussing out these toy companies until you're blue in the face, but it's really not going to change anything as far as what these things cost and stuff. You might get a cheaper figure, a more cheaply made figure like the Epic Heroes, which some people, even though that's made more for the kids, I'm willing to bet that there will be adult collectors who end up buying those Epic Hero figures just because they like that scale or what have you. But that's just the reality of this hobby and this industry. And like I said, the people that seem to spend so much time and energy getting mad about it on the internet, and I know some of them do it because they're looking for attention, making YouTube videos that says Hasbro's in big trouble, or Super 7's in big trouble, or whatever. I mean, they're doing that for attention because they know that that's going to get them a lot of views. And we definitely live in an age where everybody on social media wants to be popular and famous and have lots of followers and lots of likes and lots of clicks and all of that stuff. But I don't know. I just think it's wasting energy. And obviously those people aren't happy. So, don't, if you're not happy, if collecting this stuff doesn't make you happy, it's definitely time to get out. Even if you can afford it, if it's not making you happy, it's time to get out. And I've said that before and I'll say it again, but Coco says, "I'm excited to see the Marvel's bomb." Who's this? See, I'm not. While I don't think the movie will do well at the box office, I'm certainly not sitting here hoping it bombs. It's not. It doesn't. From the trailers I watched, it's not something that I'm excited for. And I've said this before as well. There's very few movies that are going to get me out at the movie theater anymore. I've pretty much, gotten to the point where I'll wait for it to come out on home release no matter what. There might be a few movies where I'll go, like Deadpool 3. I probably will end up going to the theater for that. Even if that movie totally sucks, just because it's got Hugh Jackman, X-Men in it and stuff, I probably will go to that movie to the theater. But that's kind of the exception to the rule at this point. But I have absolutely no problem waiting for the Marvels to come out on Disney Plus before I watch it. The biggest downside to waiting is if there's any kind of major spoiler, it'll get plastered all over the internet long before I can actually see the movie, which kind of sucks. But that's just the reality of working on the internet. But I have no strong desire to go run out and see that movie this weekend at the movie theater. So, and I didn't go see Guardians of the Galaxy 3, Volume 3 at the movie theater. And once I watched it on Disney Plus, I thought the movie was okay, but I was like, yeah, I'm glad I waited to go see, and didn't go to the movie theater. I went to see Ant-Man in the movie theater, but honestly, I could have waited until, I didn't think Ant-Man was bad, but I could have definitely waited until that came out on home release. So, same thing for the Flash movie. I went to the theater to see that, and I was pretty disappointed. I mean, I love the Michael Keaton scenes in that movie, but the movie as a whole was just not that great. So I could have definitely easily waited for that one to come out on home release. I still haven't even watched Blue Beetle. That's available on HBO Max, and I have not yet. It came out this summer when I was tied up with my dad and stuff. So, but I've not yet, gone back and watched that movie. So I don't know if that movie was. I didn't see much talk about that movie, so I really don't even know if that movie was considered decent or not. But I'm not sitting here hoping that the MCU fails. I take no joy if the Marvels fail. Now, if you're asking my honest opinion, do I think it's going to do well at the box office? From everything I've seen, no, I don't. I think it's probably going to end up being one of their lowest, if not the lowest grossing box office movie that has come out for the MCU. And I can't tell you if that's because there's just so many people that hate Brie Larson, or if it's because people aren't, I think part of it is that people, I'm not alone when I say I don't really go to the movie theater anymore. I just wait for it to come out on home release. I think a lot of people more and more are doing that. But, definitely, the MCU has got some issues, and I think a lot of it is just that there's been no real direction ever since Avengers Endgame. It's just kind of been all over the place, and we're still sitting around waiting for a direction. And we're all hoping that Kang was going to be that direction, but then now, of course, that actor is now, getting ready to go to court for brutality charges. We don't know where that's going to end up at. So, like, it's like, I like the actor as far as his ability to portray a character, as an actual human being. He might be a complete piece of shit. I have no idea. But I liked his character of Kang, and I've been enjoying Loki. Loki is probably the best Disney Plus Marvel series, both season 1 and season 2. It's probably the best Disney Plus Marvel series out there. So I've really, and I'm looking forward to seeing the season finale tonight. But it's like, do I get excited for Kang because is he really going to be around much longer, or is Disney going to basically cut him loose because of everything going on with his legal problems? And I'm sure they might replace him with Doctor Doom or whatever, or maybe even just recast him. I mean, with all his variants, I'm sure you could easily explain recasting him if you wanted to. But still, it's like it kind of leaves you really want, do I really want to get invested in this character if the actor is going to, end up going to jail or something, or get fired or whatever. So, that certainly hasn't helped the Disney and the MCU, but a lot of it's just that I really feel like there's been no direction with the MCU ever since Avengers Endgame. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again, it was a huge mistake for them to kill off their core characters, Robert Downey Jr. and Steve Rogers. Well, they didn't kill Steve Rogers, but they made him an old man and essentially put him out to pasture. That was a huge mistake before they had any of their other A-lister characters in place, like the MCU X-Men or MCU Fantastic Four. They should have waited until those guys were firmly in place, where then you could hand the reins off, and then you could retire your Iron Man and your Captain America, or give us different versions of those characters or whatever. But I think they did that way too soon, which I'm sure part of that was that those actors probably wanted increased salaries. I mean, I know they're negotiating with Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans to bring them back for Avengers Secret Wars, which I'm not really sure if that was never the plan to begin with. Trying to jam them in now at this stage, I'm not sure it's really going to work out. But I'm sure that if that didn't happen, it would be because those actors want too much money and they're not willing to come back unless Disney's willing to pay them. And whether Disney's willing to pay them or not, I don't think, I've seen like the rumor sites try and say it's a done deal, but I don't think it's a done deal. I think they're in the process of negotiating, and I think it'll come down to salary, of whether those two actors come back. But and of course, Black Widow's the other one too. So I would love to see the original Avengers back on the screen, but again, if you're just jamming them into the story for the sake of jamming them in, if you didn't have a well thought out story to have them there, I'm not really sure it's going to work out. But I guess we'll see. Ivan says, people are just tired to see what they have. People are just tired to see what they have with the MCU and going to a target demographic that's the minority. Doesn't help that no one knows all three of the main characters or find them interesting. Yeah, so, you often see people talk about, Disney being woke and their woke agenda and everything. And definitely, having these female characters is I think in part wanting to attract more and more of the female demographic to these movies, but I don't think they've been terribly successful in that. I have no problem with female characters as long as the story's good, but like I didn't hate the Miss Marvel Disney Plus series. I didn't hate well I did not like WandaVision very much, but I didn't mind Captain Marvel, Monica Rambeau in that series. I'm not sure how many people actually watch those shows, so I think I have to wonder if a lot of people going into the Marvels are going to be somewhat confused by those two characters if they never watched the Disney Plus shows. I don't know how much of the Disney Plus shows will play into the story of the Marvels movie. So, is it really imperative that you see the Miss Marvel series or WandaVision before you go see this movie? I don't know. But I think the problem sometimes with there's nothing wrong having female characters featured in these movies, but you've got to come up with a strong story. Captain Marvel did not resonate well with viewers, and everyone will have a different opinion as to why that is. I didn't dislike her, but I didn't think she was anything spectacular either. So, like, the first movie I went to see primarily because it was the into Avengers Endgame. So I wanted to see how what part that movie played into taking us into Avengers Endgame. And that was really the only reason why I went to see that movie. I've never been a huge Captain Marvel fan. So Captain Marvel herself was not a big draw for that movie. But this movie doesn't have that. We don't have that draw because, again, we've been all over the place with everything. I don't know if there'll be some major revelation in this movie to take us into Avengers Secret Wars or not. I've heard rumors that I think are mostly just bullshit to try and entice people to go see the movie. But I really don't know how much of a role this movie's going to play. But being that up to this point, there hasn't been much to entice me to that bigger picture. It's the thing that drew me to the first Captain Marvel movie is not there for the second Captain Marvel. And as far as Captain Marvel herself, she's just never been that interesting of a character to me personally to want to go see her. And I think that's a lot of the things with these characters. I'm not saying Captain Marvel doesn't have fans. I'm sure she does. But a lot of these characters that are being featured in these movies now are characters that, for the most part, couldn't even carry a long-term solo comic book series. Like, Doctor Strange. I like Doctor Strange, and I like him much better when he's in an ensemble, team like the Defenders or the Avengers than by himself. But Doctor Strange, while he's been around a long, long time, most of his comic runs are very short-lived. You get a series here, you get a series there, but he's never been able to hold a series for a long period of time before the readership starts to drop and they end up canceling it. And that goes for a lot of these characters that are getting featured in these movies now. So I think, that's just not every single Marvel character is going to be able to really bring in large audiences at the movie theater. And so you've got to have your Spider-Man, you've got to have your X-Men, you've got to have your Captain America and your Iron Man. And some characters, if you do it really good, you might, even though they weren't maybe super popular in the comics, you might be able to make them popular through the movie. I mean, let's be honest, if you really think back to the first Iron Man movie, while Iron Man was a character that was around a long time in the comics, I don't think he was nearly as popular before the first Iron Man movie than after the first Iron Man movie. That Iron Man movie and Robert Downey Jr. really kind of made that character a household name. And you can get lucky with that sometimes, but that's not going to happen with every one of these Marvel characters. I don't think so. I don't know. But going back to the original comment, I'm not hoping, or I'm not going to be like celebrating if the Marvels bomb at the box office. If you're asking my opinion, if I think it's going to do poorly, yes, I think it's going to do poorly, but I'm not sitting here hoping that it's going to do poorly, um, because I don't see any. It's better if these things do well. It'd be great if Disney and Marvel surprised us and this movie ended up being fantastic. That would be a great thing. That's what I'm really hoping for. I'm hoping that I'm wrong and that this movie is really going to be fantastic and everyone's going to end up wanting to see it. I don't think that's reality, but if you're asking me what I'm hoping for, I'd rather see that outcome than the outcome that the movie's going to be bad and is going to perform poorly. Yep. I mean, you're right. None of the Avengers were really A-lister characters. And that's because it had nothing to do with the comic books. It's, Spider-Man and the X-Men and the Hulk have always been the go-to characters for Marvel, because those are the ones that most of us grew up on watching cartoons or watching the Incredible Hulk live action series, watching the X-Men animated series, watching Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, or the Spider-Man Fox series. Those are the things that really introduced most of us to those characters, and why those are even today the go-to characters. Now, those characters all have great comics as well, especially back in the 70s, 80s, and even some in the 90s. But it's really because those were the characters that got featured in mass entertainment like cartoons and such outside of the comic books. And the movies have been the same way. The Avengers became very popular not because of their appearances in the comic books, but because of their appearances in those movies. Ryan says, I thought Endgame Shang-Chi was perfectly serviceable as the start of a new crop of heroes, but it only went down after that. I like Shang-Chi. Of course, that came out during the pandemic, so, that was another one that I didn't watch until it came, out on Disney Plus. Actually, I think I rented that movie, but still, I watched that movie at home. I didn't go to the movie theater to see that movie, but I thought that movie had potential. But I mean, but did I think he was as cool as Iron Man or Captain America or the other Avengers? No. But Shang-Chi's also a character that I never really, he would pop up in a comic book here and there when I used to read comics, but he never was like a heavily featured character in the comics, so I never really had a personal attachment to that character either. So, but I think Shang-Chi definitely could end, if used correctly. But I mean, that movie came out, what, 2 years ago, and we've not seen that character since. So even if you like that movie, he's kind of just dropped out. He's kind of completely dropped out of the scene. Like, so most people probably don't even remember that character, even if they went and saw the movie, unless they grew up with him in the comics or something. So, I think that character could be more popular than he is right now, but he hasn't been used very effectively, I don't think. I don't even think, if you want my honest opinion, I know a lot of people say Spider-Man No Way Home was this fantastic movie, and it was certainly cool to see the old Spider-Man, Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, and all the classic, from the original Spider-Man movie villains on screen and kind of brought into the MCU. But as far as the movie itself and the overall story, I didn't think Spider-Man No Way Home was really that great of a movie. Um, and I think the reason why most people find that movie so great is only because of the nostalgia of having those more classic Spider-Man characters in that movie. Um, But does that really, and so that movie did pretty good at the box office because of that, but does that really create a good foundation to build off of? Like, all these Spider-Man villain movies that we're getting from Sony now. I just, the Morbius movie, I still haven't even seen that movie, but it got panned so badly by so many people that I was like, I don't even really want to watch this movie. The Venom movies, I never thought were that great either. The first Venom was better than the second one, but I didn't think either of those movies was that great. Um, Craven seems to have some positive hype to it, but honestly, I can't say I'm super excited for a Craven the Hunter movie. Um, so I don't know. I really, you know, I would. I'm most excited for the Thunderbolts. I'm not even sure it's going to be a good movie, but I think that could have potential. And of course, it's got U.S. Agent, which is one of my favorite characters. Avengers Secret Wars, especially, if it ended up being based more on the original Secret Wars with the Beyonder as opposed to the later Secret Wars, that I think could be really cool. I mean, I would love to see a movie kind of, where all the heroes and villains are taken to a battle world and they have to fight it out and stuff. I mean, that to me would be awesome, but whether that's what we actually get or not, I don't know. But that definitely, would probably get me into the theater to see. But when or if we ever get an actual MCU X-Men, I look forward to seeing what they give us there. And hopefully that will be good. I would love to see Hugh Jackman. I know he's getting old. I know age is definitely becoming a factor, but I would love to see a movie with Hugh Jackman Wolverine, Chris Evans, Steve Rogers, Robert Downey Jr. Iron Man. Um, I would love to see a movie with all those guys in it, but whether we actually get that or not, I don't know. And even with those guys in it, you still need a good story for it to really be good. Like I said, had Marvel gotten all the licenses sorted out, well, I definitely think that caused problems because when they mapped out the movies after Avengers Endgame, they didn't realize they were going to get X-Men and Fantastic Four, and then I think that threw a wrench in everything because then they had to go back to the drawing board. So I think that's why everything after Avengers Endgame has come off being much more disorganized than what all the movies that we had leading up to Avengers Endgame. Because, obviously starting with the movies from Iron Man 1 to Avengers Endgame, there was, I think, a plan in place to get us from point A to, point Z. Whereas everything after Avengers Endgame, I think, got kind of thrown on its head as they started to try and figure out how they were going to incorporate, all these 20th Century Fox licenses. So I definitely think that probably ended up, while it's great that, they've got the X-Men and stuff, I think that definitely kind of screwed things up as far as planning out these latest movies and stuff. And now it's just gotten to be like as more and more of these movies come out and as more and more of them are less well received, people, their expectations are going down, 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 down. So now everyone's expecting, like, for the Marvels could be a completely awesome movie, but I think everyone is expecting that movie to be bad or do poorly just based on expectations, because we've just had this string of movies that kind of have just been less and less popular with people, and so it gets harder to kind of dig out of that hole, because now we're just kind of experiencing, we're just expecting the movie to be bad. It's the same problem that the DC universe has had pretty much since the get-go, because everyone just expects the DC movies to be bad now. And in large part they have been, but one day we might actually get a good, DC movie, and then, we'll have to see where that goes. Coco says, well, so just going off of that teaser trailer for Echo, it looks more like it's going to be a Kingpin series than an Echo series. So, and honestly, if that's the route they go, it might be interesting. I have no connection to Echo. I've never even read her character in the comics. She didn't terribly impress me in the Hawkeye series. But, that trailer of Kingpin, I mean, that was pretty interesting. And, especially if we get more Daredevil in it as well. So, but it's hard to say. It's hard to say where they're going to go with that. I mean, the fact that they completely scrapped what they were doing with the Daredevil series and have essentially started over, I mean, that's not a good sign. I mean, hopefully maybe they will come out with something better. But when you hear that, it makes you think, oh, well, now they're just going to be scrambling to throw something together, and it seems less likely that it's going to be any good. What's up, Camp Crystal Lake? John Estrada says, have faith in James Gunn. I think I'm not as big a James Gunn fan as some people are. So I thought the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie was decent, but the second one was only so-so to me. Same thing with the third one. The Peacemaker series, I started out not liking, but it kind of grew on me. So I'll say that one was decent. The second Suicide Squad movie I thought was okay, but I actually liked the first Suicide Squad movie a little bit better. But, I don't know. My biggest fear with all of the DC stuff is the moment one of those movies bomb at the box office, my thinking is that the Warner Brother execs will just completely bail, because that's what we've seen every time. If the movie isn't like a huge box office success, the Warner Brother execs lose confidence in it, and they decide they want to scrap it and start over. And so I feel like if that first James Gunn movie isn't like a huge box office success, whatever James Gunn may have had planned after that will end up getting thrown in the garbage, and they'll end up trying to start over again. So I guess we'll just have to see how that goes. I think they really fucked up getting rid of Henry Cavill as Superman. I think he had real potential. I realize, and I'll be the first to say that Man of Steel was not like a favorite movie of mine but that had less to do with the actor and more to do with the story. But I think his portrayal as Superman had the potential to become as iconic as Christopher Reeve as Superman. So I think they really kind of screwed up in dumping him as Superman. They should have given him one more chance to give us that character on screen. Ben Affleck as Batman. I didn't mind Ben Affleck as Batman, but I wasn't like in love with him as Batman either. So I don't mind them recasting, Ben Affleck. I think Gal Gadot should stay as Wonder Woman. I think she has done that second Wonder Woman movie sucked, but I think her as the character, I think she's done, a good job with it. I have no problem with them recasting Aquaman. I never thought Momoa was a good fit for Aquaman. I don't mind him as an actor. And in fact, I think if they do end up recasting him as Lobo, that would be a great fit for him. But I always thought he was a horrible Aquaman. Obviously, Flash needs to be recast. I actually liked the actor who played Cyborg, especially if you watch the extended Snyder Cut version of Justice League. I thought he actually did a really good job with that character, but being that he had such a bad fallout with the studio, I don't see him ever returning as Cyborg. But uh but I definitely think it was a big mistake on them getting rid of Henry Cavill as Superman. I think both DC and Marvel just need to do one and done good superhero movie. I don't know. I mean, I prefer the cinematic universes. I love Star Trek because of how each series would build upon the other and how it was a continuing story, one that began back in 1960 and continued through the 80s and 90s. I've not been as impressed with Star Trek in recent years, though I did think the final season of Picard was fantastic. But that keeps me more engaged in general. I don't mind having like, especially if we're talking about TV. I don't mind having standalone episodes. I don't think every episode has to be part of a bigger story, but I do like it when there's a continuing thread throughout that kind of knits together a universe. I understand as the bigger that universe gets, the harder it gets to keep the continuity and all of that. But I do like that formula more so than just a basic standalone movie. I mean, even going back to the original, Michael Keaton Batman movies and all those Batman movies that came out during that time period. I always remember, like when they would do things like mention Metropolis, and it was like, ooh, are we going to get Superman at some point in one of these movies? And that was always something that I really liked. And I mean, frankly, that's one of the great things about comic books. At least it used to be that, you would get a title and then you'd want to pick up this title because another part of the story took place in this title, and then you'd want to get this title. Sometimes it would get a bit much, especially as things got more gimmicky. But when you had a really good story, like say, the Mutant Massacre, I don't know, going back into the 80s with X-Men, but the Mutant Massacre storyline in the X-Men and the Mutant books was an awesome storyline, and it was great how it was woven in between all the various different X-Men books at the time. And, it made books like New Mutants, which I never found to be that interesting in general, but I really, when the New Mutants title came out with the portion of the story for the Mutant Massacre, I was really interested in it. And even things like Power Pack or Thor, Thor got to be in that storyline, and it was like, and that probably got me into Thor and stuff. So I like that formula if it's done well, but I definitely can understand how it can get tricky, how especially with movies and stuff where your actors start to get old, over time, it's hard to believe that, how many years it's been since that first Iron Man movie came out. I mean, sometimes it feels like it was just yesterday, but it was really a long time ago. So, as Robert Downey Jr. gets older, it's no longer really practical for him to keep playing Iron Man. Unlike in the comics where, characters never age, the actors do age. Same thing with Star Trek, your actors get old and then you got to try and replace them and stuff. So I understand how it can be more difficult, but for me personally, I generally like it when there's a connection. And it gets me, going back to the first Captain Marvel movie. I probably would have never gone to see the first Captain Marvel movie if it wasn't that I wanted to see how it was going to lead into Avengers Endgame. And I think that's why that movie did so well, because everyone went to see it not for Captain Marvel, because they wanted to see the next piece of the puzzle to get us into Avengers Endgame. So I definitely feel like, especially when you're dealing with less popular characters, it gets people to go watch those movies because they're more interested in the overall picture than the individual characters themselves. Big Star Trek fan too. I just want them to rely on continuity as a good story point or not, but not as a game. Well, I agree. It can be gimmicky, but like, and it can be like, so using Star Trek as an example. So Star Trek Strange New Worlds, which is, for those of you not familiar, is one of the more recent Star Trek shows on Paramount Plus. The premise of the show is it takes place on board the USS Enterprise before the time period of Captain Kirk taking command of the ship. So you've got characters like Spock that are serving on board the Enterprise, but they're supposed to be younger versions. And again, like Captain Kirk has not yet come on board the ship as the captain. So you've got Captain Christopher Pike, who was actually the original captain and the original pilot of Star Trek, but I'm not going to go into that much detail. But so, and that show in its own right is actually pretty good. But then there are things that really irritate me about that show when like they start introducing the Gorn as like almost like an alien, like from the Aliens movies, type character, when it was established previously that the Gorn wasn't really introduced until Captain Kirk was on board the Enterprise. So you get that continuity screwed up. Or even things like when Captain, I don't know how many of you ever watched the original Star Trek series, but like the original like Captain Kirk's quarters in the original Enterprise was smaller than this room you see behind me. Okay? But like if you watch Strange New Worlds, Captain Pike has like this huge like quarters with like a kitchen and a fireplace, and it's like I know because special effects have improved and they can do more things with special effects and they can create, that's why they do it. But it's like, you kind of laugh, and it's like Captain Kirk had this small closet for his quarters, and Pike here has like this huge glamorous suite is his quarters. And honestly, when you think about military vehicles, the small, more cramped quarters is definitely more realistic, but nevertheless. So I'm kind of rambling here, but just saying, I understand there are pluses and there are minuses to the whole, continuity universe building type thing. But in general, I still like the universe type building thing. John Estrada, did I watch the music? I did. And I actually thought that ended up being like I'm not a huge, like, I don't like musicals, like movies that are like musicals and stuff. I generally don't like those. And I was not going in with high expectations. And I won't say it was like, oh my God, it was fantastic, but it was a lot better than I was expecting. They at least made a decent story out of it. I thought so. It definitely wasn't like my favorite episode, but it definitely came off better than I was expecting. And I so much want them to do a Star Trek Legacy series, which is the rumored series that would come after Star Trek Picard season 3, which would basically pick up where that left off. I so much want them to do that, but so far we haven't gotten an announcement on that, and I don't know if we're going to. John Estrada, is Captain Pike also black? I don't think so, but I won't swear to. I don't remember the actor who played Black Bolt, so he might be. I guess I would say Google it, but see you later, Wolfpack. In fact, yeah, it's after 8:30, so I think we are gonna call it a night. But I appreciate everyone who once again has come on and just listened to me ramble. I want to tell you, so next week, if all goes well, meaning mostly if I figure out the technology, I'm gonna bring on a guest next week. I'm gonna bring on Big Nerdy from Nerdzoic, because for those of you not familiar with him. He's got a YouTube channel, but he runs a small e-tailer business. So I'm gonna talk to him about what it's like to run a small e-tailer business in this day and age. E-tailer business for action figures, of course. So, like I say, if all goes well, next Thursday for the live stream, I'm going to have him on as a guest. I'd like to start doing, like, bringing people on more, so it's not just me sitting here rambling by myself for these live streams. So I'm not making promises, and like, you know, I had Shartimus Prime on here, you know, a couple weeks ago, and there was the bad delay, and so I'm not sure why there was that delay, but I got to try. It's hard to test these things out because unless you actually go online and actually stream, you know, it's hard to test this stuff out to see if it's going to work correctly. But like I say, if all goes well, I'm going to have a Big Nerdy on from Nerdzoic next week, and we're going to talk about, you know, things, but mostly the focus will be, you know, just listening to him tell us about what it's like to run a small toy e-tailer business in this day and age. So hopefully you guys will check that out. I don't know if I'll be here tomorrow with a news video. It is definitely, you probably noticed this month is, you know, the news is kind of, as we get closer to the holidays, news kind of, you know, these November, December generally is a pretty slow news period for toys. So you get a lot of sales, but as far as like new reveals and stuff, you know, there isn't going to be a whole lot. So I don't know if there's really enough news to talk about to have a news video tomorrow. So maybe we'll see. Tomorrow is, this weekend is going to be for you Four Horsemen fans is Mythic Con. So tomorrow, I believe the Four Horsemen are going to be revealing a bunch of new Mythic Legion figures on a live stream. So we'll have that to talk about, but we'll see if there's enough there to do a news video tomorrow. If not, then I should probably be back on Monday. But so we'll see. But once again, let me see. Jerry says, "Too bad I backed Street Humans, but I did not fund Shartimus Prime Street Humans. He got close. He got almost to 90,000, but he came up a little short. But he's going to be back. You know, I've seen people like calling him a failure and stuff. I mean, that's so ridiculous. Like, yeah, he had a setback, but you know, most people who are successful in life, you know, they're not just automatically successful. Most people fail multiple times before they're actually successful. And it's the people who learn from their mistakes, pick themselves up, brush themselves off, and come back even better. Those are the people generally in life who are successful. And I think, you know, Shartimus will definitely be back with Street Humans. So if that is a line that you were interested in, then I think you will get another shot at those in the coming future. But yes, he did come up short. It was a fun he did a 15-hour live stream last weekend, and I joined in towards the end of that. That was actually pretty fun, and it was cool to see all the people coming out to help support him. Even people like Ryan Ting from Hasbro coming on to help him support the Kickstarter. So it was definitely kind of cool to see people in the community come out and support, you know, what might be deemed as like competing, you know, a competitor or what have you, making action figures, you know, kind of supporting that. So that was kind of cool. But yeah, so anyway, you guys stay safe out there as always. And until next time, guys, I will catch you later.
Hey, thanks for watching today's video, and be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit that bell notification to alert it every time I upload a new video. And be sure to head over to the Toy News International and Marvelous News message boards communities. It's a great place to talk toys and win cool contests like $100 store credits to Big Bad Toy Store. And remember, action figures are great.